All right, welcome to part two of my 31 horror films in the month of October challenge. This being October of 2014. Mentioned in my last video, I've been trying to do these challenges for ages, since I was a young single guy with plenty of time to watch Italian horror films, so I have no idea why I didn't finish these challenges. I usually just peter out. So this time I finally made it all the way to number 31. Or did I? You'll find out. But yes, number 16 was Black Sabbath. I was on a Mario Bava kick, so I figured I would pop on that. Unfortunately, I saw the American International version, which had some of the stories swapped, and also had a kind of weird revamp of a film about a telephone call. It's basically more like a giallo. It's a prostitute and her lover, and her pimp had been put away by her and is now out and about, and the jilted lesbian lover decides to stage some phone calls from the pimp to terrify the other girl into inviting her back into her life, and then the pimp is really out there like looking for her. So that was actually pretty cool, but it was totally redone as a supernatural piece in the American version, and it didn't really work that well. But man, the colors, it was Mario Bava had done Black Sunday, which I had seen prior to this, but Black Sabbath, which of course features no Black Sabbaths, was just, the colors were killer. I mean, amazing stuff. Boris Karloff did some interstitial pieces, I love the Crypt Keeper, and also stars in one about a Russian vampire called the Verdalak that only sucks blood from people that it loves, which is kind of interesting. But yeah, stylish, and just the colors are amazing. The first story with a woman who is a nurse and swipes some jewelry from a dying woman or a corpse. I guess she's already dead then. A dying corpse. Things go horribly awry for her, but there's this amazing apartment she lives in with a neon sign outside that's always just flashing color. Really, really amazing look visually. Followed that up with Asylum, number 17 on my list. Cool Amicus flick from the 70s, and scared the living crap out of me when I was a kid. I had seen this. I actually watched it during the day. It was one of those things on NBC. The local station used to have horror films and Japanese monster movies and stuff in the middle of the day. And I still remember watching the first story, in which someone is vivisected and stored in a freezer, and then the parts of the body start coming to life and assaulting this other person in the basement. And there's a hand that's crawling around on the beams and the scaffolding. And I just remember my mom like, let's go to McDonald's, and I'm like terrified, and going to McDonald's and just thinking that there was a hand or a leg crawling around ready to kill me at any moment. And we even went to, there was one of those like carnivals in a box that they had opened up in the local shopping plaza, and it was like trying to go on the fun house and all the rides, and still terrified. There was body parts going everywhere. Yeah, Herbert Lom in there, a really kind of creepy role. A lot of good short stories, typical of the era, like if you've seen Vault of Horror, Tales of the Crypt, some kind of moral tales and that kind of stuff. But solid, really really moody. I like it. Followed it up with Dread, something I've been meaning to check out for a while. It's one of my all-time favorite Clyde Barker short stories that he had written in the Books of Blood series. In fact, on Halloween night, I remember reading that short story to my roommates back in the 90s. And I always loved the kind of the way it wound up at the end. And if you haven't read it or seen the film, the film's actually pretty capable. It's got Jasper from Twilight. But also the young was it what do they call him on the show, Enterprise or whatever, the young Inspector Lewis or Morse, I forget which one's which, but the heck is his name? I can't remember. It's not Enterprise, but it's the guy that plays the young Inspector Morse or whatever on PBS or BBC. Amazing job as this very, it reminds me a lot of Pickman's Model. I don't know why, because it's very different, the H.P. Lovecraft story, but he's this edgy guy meeting up with this college student played by Jackson Rathbone, and decides that they should kind of delve into what it means to fear and and kind of go into like one of those like it's like a Fight Club-esque situation where how deep can you go into the fear and what's real and what's not, and um, it turns ugly after a while. There's some stuff invented that wasn't in the short story because they had to pad it out to an hour and a half feature. But oh, Endeavor, thanks. That was all of a sudden it just flashed to me. That was the name. Yeah, yeah, Endeavor. That's the show. Could have been Enterprise. This new Star Trek show with a young British cop in Oxford. Anyways, but it gets grisly in more ways than one. Just nasty stuff with like eating rotten meat and things like that. But I don't know. It was pretty capable. It had a good like that kind of like sulfur glow to a lot of it, and yeah, Jackson Rathbone was solid, and yeah, it was pretty disturbing, but as much good Clive Barker is. Followed it up with some not really proper H.P. Lovecraft, but based on a H.P. Lovecraft story, The Dunwich Horror, which I guess in this film was called The Dunwich Horror. But Daniel Haller did it, and it was another one of those American International flicks, and it has this crazy credit sequence. It's animated and really bizarre looking. You're going to be tripping out thinking you're time traveling back into the early 70s. And I think Les Baxter did the music, so just really kind of out there stuff. But Dean Stockwell, if you ever seen him in Dune, has some crazy eyes, and he plays this kid, and his brother is possibly inhuman, and he's obsessed with getting another girl pregnant, like his wife, from possibly an evil spirit or some sort of elder god, and he's also obsessed with finding the Necronomicon, which is at the local university, and getting his hands on it. So there's a lot of stuff with local townsfolk hating his family and thinking they're creepy, and a lot of wind up and kind of low budget stuff. But I love all the amazing, crazy shots they have with the fisheye camera when he's doing his strange little hand movements and his occult rituals. And so there's even a shot in the graveyard where the camera's looking out of the grave at him as he's straddling the kind of support struts, and with that crazy fisheye look. Interesting stuff. Followed that up with Fascination. I've been meaning to delve into some genre-lens stuff. I watched Living Dead Girl years ago, but I hadn't seen this one. And again, color. Color is so key in this flick. There's basically this bandit that turns against his own people and shows up this creepy castle that has a moat around it, so there's only really one way in. And he's got all the stolen money from his group of rebels, but he's got this bright red striped jacket that's like just impossible of a hue. So it's brilliant seeing it in HD. Gorgeous stuff. So he trips across this castle and finds these two young girls that are in there, and they're pretty naughty. So it basically turns. John Merlin also did like a lot of porn films, I guess. So it pretty much turns into a softcore porn flick for a little while, and then eventually the rebels show up. They the bandits, and they want their money back. And then meanwhile, throughout this entire film, the two girls keep telling him that he doesn't want to be there. He doesn't want to hang around. He wants to get out because they've got some friends coming, and it's going to be bad news. And of course, it is bad news, but it's kind of cool. There's a lot of like blood play and stuff like that, but it's not just your typical vampire flick or anything like that. So I like that aspect of it. And again, it's beautiful, and yeah, if you want to see just naked people and pretend you're not watching a porn, you can check this flick out. Then I went into got back into Takashi Shimizu's American version of The Grudge, the unrated extended director's cut, which isn't really that much extended, but a little more gory. And it's interesting because I absolutely adore the original Japanese film and the sequel. The sequel is really snaky and strange too, in its continuity. And this thing is pretty much the same film, and it finds a way to inject all these American characters into Japan. But it's so interesting as a comparison piece because the first one managed to be terrifying. Again, not always during daytime, but during brightly lit environs. There's a scene in an apartment where a sister of one of the characters is killed. In the original, she's in this super brightly lit apartment. It's still just terrifying. And the house, the main Grudge house, and the premise being that if some sort of super violent crime occurs, that it forms a stain on the environment, and that anybody that comes in contact with it has this residual curse on them that will kill them, no matter, no ifs, ands, or buts. So they did a pretty good job with the casting. William Apeth there, also known as Ethan Raume from Lost, shows up, aka Tom Cruise's cousin, and Ted Raimi, solid side character in there. But Sarah Michelle Gellar, I never really kind of cared about her one way or the other, but she was fine as the main character. Um, but it was interesting, the comparison between those brightly lit, very clean environments in the original film, and these, which is basically the same house in Japan, but it's grimy, cobwebs everywhere, and just super, depressing and dirty. So, gotta love American filmmaking versus Japanese filmmaking in that regards. But it's not bad as far as remakes go. And followed that up with this little nugget I found in the cheapie bin. Ju-on White Ghost, Ju-on Black Ghost, which is, it's technically two short films, 60 minutes each, that are a tribute to the 10-year anniversary of the Ju-on series. And much like if you've seen the Tomy flicks, or the first two Ju-on straight-to-video flicks, it's shot on video, so it does have that kind of soap opera look, which is kind of weird when you're going at a creepy Japanese horror flick. That said, some of the scares are pretty scary. There's a creepy cassette tape that has sounds of the dead on it. There's a head in the bag, much like the Tomy series. There's a weird old grandmother with a basketball. And each of the stories, they do connect to each other. Toshio, the little dead kid from The Grudge, does make an appearance, though it doesn't really tie in that much with the original Grudge series. But keeping in tone with the structure of the films, each one of these sub-films is like snaky and all over the map with its continuity and jumping around in time and multiple characters and some solid writing, not too shabby. Though there is one ghost that's kind of not really a friendly ghost, but a forgiving ghost, which is a strange entity. It reminded me more of something from like Cairo, the movie Pulse, or something to that effect, where it's just like a sadness, but it isn't usually much. If there's sadness, it's followed by murder, because they kill you. So it was kind of strange that there wasn't the ultimate death, but pretty cool nonetheless. Followed that up with one of my all-time favorites, a flick I caught on cable back in the day, and really didn't think I was going to enjoy, but then was immediately surprised. Fred Decker's Night of the Creeps. I have this really cool Laserdisc cutout, punch out that my parents picked up for me, I think at Tower Records in Boston back in the day. But yeah, it's got Jason Lively and a lot of really interesting people in there. Tom Atkins in a killer role with some of the best lines ever, and it's just this killer homage to every possible horror movie film, from 50s sci-fi to and then it gets into the modern 80s stuff. It starts off with this alien spacecraft, so it's almost like Critters like, and then there's these creepy aliens, which I loved. It has dual subtitles, kind of like if you ever watched a lot of Hong Kong bootlegs back in the day, that would have the Mandarin subtitles and then the English subtitles underneath them. It has a different alien dialogue on the top and then the English underneath it. And this alien escapes with this creepy life form and then crashes in the woods in the 50s at the same time that this escaped serial killer is going around slashing people. And then it flashes the 80s with a really cool tune that kind of reminds me of that and We Dance song there. But Imperfect Strangers is like the name of the band. Never heard of them before, but really catchy stuff. And turns into the usual kind of 80s college fare with a kid and his buddy, and they're the losers trying to hook up with the hot babes and sneaking into fraternities and that kind of stuff. And quickly, it gets a lot like Slither. I think Slither was a huge homage to this flick when these slug-like creatures start invading people and corpses and returning them to life. Cool flick. And it may be a little too cheesy and a little too 80 for people, but deal with it. Follow that up with one of my favorite 90s flicks, and some say the last great John Carpenter film, In the Mouth of Madness. Saw this in the theater, and again, that's absolutely the best way to see it, because there's a film within the film that is the film that you just watched, and it ends with somebody losing their mind watching the film, so there's that kind of cyclical madness that carries over to you, the viewer, which is amazing. It's a cool shout out to H.P. Lovecraft and Stephen King. This character, Sutter Kane, played by Jurgen Prochnow, is essentially Stephen King if he was H.P. Lovecraft style writer, kind of devoting his stuff to elder gods and creepy stuff like that. But he's got a town, a fictional town that Sam Neill discovers is possibly real or is possibly just an insurance fraud set up in order to sell books. And there's a mysterious disappearance that he goes to investigate. And yeah, really, really cool stuff. Love this flick. And then I followed that up with something I remember watching in the 90s. And if you ever saw Kindred the Embraced, the adaptation of the Vampire Masquerade role-playing game, that was kind of the after effect of this flick called Blood Ties. Jim McBride directed it, and Patrick Bacow, who was also in Kindred the Embrace, is in it, and Bo Hopkins, and it's very like OC. It's like what if like the OC had vampires in it, except in this they're Carpathian Americans, and they're very prominent businessmen in Long Beach, and they're these crazy fundamentalists. Grace Zabriskie from of course, Twin Peaks fame shows up as one of them that are trying to kill these vampires. And then young, I think it's Jason London is in this one. Yeah, Jason London is this kid that his parents are killed, and he doesn't realize that he's a vampire, has superpowers. But they can go out in the daytime. There's a lot of bad kids in the family that are a throwback to the Lost Boys riding around on their motorcycles. But yeah, you can go out in the day, but you do have superpowers, and they do bite people, but it's not really your typical vampire lore. It's, yeah, it would have made it an interesting show. I guess this was a pilot for Fox, but then it fell apart. So not very super horror-y, but it's horror-y enough. Then I finally stuck around and watched Evil Dead, the remake, which I'd been tempted to watch for a long time. Fede Alvarez did it, and you know what? It's really good. It's got a lot of the same structure and material in the original Evil Dead, of course, Cabin in the Woods. But I loved the concept of this not being a getaway, it being an intervention of sorts, and a way for the one character to kick heroin. That's pretty dark. Usually when college kids go into the woods, it's to have a good time and smoke pot and stuff like that. So I like that there was this really dark flip side of that, where they're trying to get away from drugs. And all these characters just have all this baggage and sorrow with them, and to have all this horrible stuff going on with demons and creepiness going on around them. It's great because it allows the main character to see things that could also be the result of a kicking binge and just being in that kind of like Renton from Trainspotting madness, where you're seeing babies crawling on the ceiling. You could easily see creepy people in the woods and stuff like that. So man, just really great camera work, and moody, and just dark, and taking no prisoners. I like that aspect of it. I didn't want another jokey kind of Sam Raimi-esque thing. Sam Raimi already did that a bunch of times, so fair enough. Pleasantly surprised. Followed it up with The Conjuring. I've seen this about 3 or 4 times. You know, I hated Saw. I thought Saw was a loaf of crap. The twist in that movie is the biggest loaf of crap I've ever seen. I've had a water bottle in front of me throughout this entire video. I'm just going to reveal that this is not a water bottle. It's actually a toaster. Whoop-de-do. That's the twist of Saw. But James Wan totally redeemed himself with this sucker. Nice throwback to 70s filmmaking style. Telling the story of the possibly apocryphal story of this family in Rhode Island, and the Warrens in particular, and how they investigated this one haunting. Lily Taylor's great in this thing, and everybody's great in it. Just a really just down-to-earth, good haunted house flick, and amazing sound design. Killer transfer. I mean, after that Red Riding Hood thing totally disappointed me with the blacks and the shadow detail, this thing really brings the thunder. Yeah, can't say enough good about it. I haven't seen Annabelle, the doll prequel. Not really that excited about it. Not really too excited about seeing too many other films in this series unless they screw it up. And there's even parts in the end where they almost go over the line. They almost start getting into that like Amityville Horror remake territory, but never quite go that far. And Insidious I liked too. It was very imaginative, but some of the investigator characters, yeah, I wasn't really that excited about in Insidious, and I think the investigator characters were far better in this, and just the down-to-earth scares, and the fact that there's even a scene where a character sees something in the corner and we don't see it. Loved that aspect. Followed that up with a flick I haven't seen since I rented it on Laserdisc back in the 90s, so I got it on Laserdisc. Candyman. It's really interesting Clyde Barker adaptation, and mostly because Tony Todd is this semi-sympathetic character. I mean, he's this character that had horrible things done to him, and now he's haunting people as a mythical urban legend in the Cabrini Green section of Chicago, which is now, I guess, demolished. But a lot of really cool. Like, I guess they eventually rehashed that concept in the Urban Legends film later. But I like what they did with it here, and Virginia Madsen's really solid in this thing too. The Philip Glass score tends to annoy me. A lot of Philip Glass scores tend to annoy me. I didn't really like his stuff he did for the original Dracula that came on that one of the Universal Monster DVDs. But Bernard Rose's kind of choice of hovering godlike over everything for a lot of overhead shots was really cool, and I think it was a really good adaptation. It's almost a bit of a love story, which is neat too. Followed that up with a flick I saw on cable or Channel 3, CBS, back in the day when I was a kid. Mazes and Monsters, an adaptation of the Rona Jaffe book, which was a loose adaptation of an apocryphal story of a kid that went into a steam tunnel and killed himself playing live Dungeons and Dragons. I didn't even hear about LARPing or live action role playing until my friends started playing Nero back in the late 80s. And no offense, Nero guys, just couldn't get into it. But this was kind of positing that Tom Hanks could be so deep into playing this role-playing game. Chris Makepeace, also from My Bodyguard, showing up in this thing. But anyways, Tom Hanks is so deeply disturbed that he plays the game and thinks that he is actually the character in the game and loses touch with reality. And if you were around in the early 80s, you remember that all sorts of crazy fundamentalists and people were, one, saying that Dungeons & Dragons was a training tool to turn you into a Satanist, but also that it would literally crack your perception of reality and cause you to have a flip, which eventually Tom Hanks does, where he thinks he's his character all the time and his other real-world character is his imagined, play character. Totally stupid, but kind of fun. Horrible transfer too. This thing looks like it was taken from like an 8th generation film print that was covered in horrible speckles and then transferred to VHS and copied a couple times. But yeah, what are you gonna do? It's pretty cool. And then followed it up with Stir of Echoes. I hadn't seen that in a while, and nice adaptation from David Koepp. Did work on the Jurassic Park series and things like that. But he adapted and directed a story from Richard Matheson. Sorry, not William Matheson. Who did I Am Legend, and it's cool. It came out the same year, 1999, as The Sixth Sense. Also features a kid that can see dead things and other things. And Kevin Bacon is this kind of regular Joe Sixpack, who, thanks to Ileana Douglas, his wife's witchy sister, now puts him through a hypnotism at a party, and then opens his mind to all sorts of other things, and he discovers that maybe there's a crime to be solved in his house and his neighborhood. Cool flick. I dug it. And then I followed it up with The Living Dead at Manchester Morgue, also known as Let Sleeping Corpses Lie, and 50 other titles. Jorge Grau's flick with Ray Lovelock, who's just this, I love how everybody's a jerk. The main character is a total jerk to this girl that runs over his motorcycle, and he's forced to ride with her into town to see her sister, who's a heroin junkie, and there's going to be some sort of intervention going on. But then there's this agricultural experiment in town that's bringing dead people back to life, and these characters have to deal with it. And then Arthur Kennedy comes in as the douchiest cop on the planet Earth. It's just horrible to everybody. And meanwhile, the main two characters are trying to solve the crime and figure out what's going on. And yeah, solid kills. Definitely many homages to George A. Romero's Night of the Living Dead. The Italian producer definitely wanted to make a color version of Night of the Living Dead, but Grau's filmmaking and camera work is just really cool. It's got an edge to it, and right off the bat, you just realize you're watching something special, stylistic wise. So, Living Dead in Manchester Morgue, highly recommend it. Some cool documentaries on there too from the Blue Underground version. So that was number 31, closing out Halloween. Hopefully next year I can do the challenge again and not puss out about halfway through. So I'll be up next with some maybe do a Laserdisc collection video, some stuff like that, and some things when I'm not on the radio to keep you entertained. Thanks for watching, and we'll talk to you later.